Right, we'll jump straight in because I know you're a busy boy, and I think
Let's do
my
it.
right. So now I was just a little bit too old to get into Transformers. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was literally my cut-off point as a kid. So for me, I'm really fascinated. What's the pull with Transformers? Clearly, you must be a fan if you're involved with this comic. What was the USP for you?
I think what that's a good question. Um, I'm trying to get my order of my the timeline correct, so it may not be exactly right, but I'll do my best. So I remember being in the toy store with my grandfather, and my grandfather would always, whenever he'd come to Massachusetts, he lived in upstate New York. Whenever he'd come down to Massachusetts, he'd take me to the Toys R Us, and he's like, "We're, you can get one thing." And my parents never did that, but my grandfather was like an old school Italian. As I got older, and I'd leave the house without him, he'd hand me a 20, and he's like, "Have a good time," you know. But when I was a little kid, he would bring me to Toys R Us, and he'd like go pick something out, and I'd always pick out a Star Wars like toy.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, but then I saw this Optimus Prime on like the display, and it was the American packaging, like it was different than
Yeah.
the original like Japanese packaging, but the toy was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Convoy.
And made out of metal
Um,
as well in those days.
yeah, that's right. And my eye caught it, and I don't. I'd like to think that like I had an idea of like really great design aesthetics back then, but I was like, that's different. So maybe I'm remembering it with rose-colored glasses.
Of course.
I don't want to puff myself up too much, but like just this like specifically Japanese design vibe about it that was different than everything else in Toys R Us at the time. Um, and that was around the same time that I started watching the reruns that were happening in the 90s on TV after school. Because I was born in '87, so I missed the initial airing.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I watched the show on rerun after school, and it blew my mind. And I'm not sure what about the show I loved so much, but I think the character designs were a big part of it. I really did like the music. I but it was those two things, that toy that I got from my grandfather, and then the TV show, and then going forward, trying to get deeper into the lore, which there was not a lot of. As I got a little older, I kept trying to find the Marvel comics at my local
Mm.
comic book store that were coming out in the mid '80s, and this is like '95, and my local comic book store owner, he's like, "Oh, you're here again?" And I was like, "Yeah, you got any more Transformers comics?" He's like, "Dude, kid, nobody's buying those. I don't like go and look for Transformers comics. Uh, and this is, of course, before eBay and all that stuff. So
Of course.
I would just go in there every week hoping that they had stumbled on some new comics, and they had like three Transformers comics, and they all did not have Optimus Prime in them. So I was like, pass, pass, pass. Um, and it's always been a kind of journey of like visual excitement for the Transformers that I've just really connected with, and that's also intertwined with my drawing history, in the sense that I remember trying to draw Optimus Prime like over and over and over and over again
Right.
when I was a kid, and never really being able to get it until like third or fourth grade. I just gave up, and it wasn't until that I got the call to see if I would be interested in writing and drawing Transformers that I decided whether I take the job or not. It's time to finally learn that shit.
Right.
Pardon my language.
No, don't worry about it. And how does it feel getting that call? Were you expecting the call? Did it come out of the blue? Was it a Steven Spielberg moment like people always talk about, but with Robert Kirkman instead of Spielberg? How does it work and how did
Well,
you feel?
the person who called me was Sean Makowitz, who's over at Skybound, and he edited Murder Falcon and Extremity. We worked
Right.
very closely together for 2.5 years, and we had a great working relationship. So when he called, he said, "Hey, we got the license," and he just kind of threw it out there. He's like, "How would you feel about writing and drawing Transformers?" And I initially was very hesitant, because it's a licensed book. You
Mm.
know, comic book creators, you hear licensed project, you start tensing up, because it can be intense, and I knew that, and so I was like, "Oh, I'll have to think about it." And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like it was the right choice. I had just finished Do a Power Bomb, or I was finishing the art on it, and I was exhausted. And I kind of wanted somebody to tell me what to do for a little while. Coming up with my own creator-owned stories is a lot of friggin' work, and it's amazing work, and it's so fulfilling. But I am not. I wish I was, but I'm not Rick Remender. That guy just boom, boom, boom. Creator-owned, creator-owned, creator-owned. I don't have that. I need to take breaks. I need to work on something that is lower stakes, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So the more I thought about it, and the more that I drew Optimus Prime, the more that I felt this is the right choice. And Sean and I stayed in touch. We have been staying in touch through, after Murder Falcon came Wonder Woman, we'd stayed in touch all through that time. And I finally called him back, and I was like, you know what, let's do it. This is be a good time. And it has been a great time.
It feels to me, I mean, you talk about licensing comics, and I might be wrong, but it feels to me Hasbro are a little bit more hands off than maybe bigger franchises are. It seems in all the PR I've read, they're really gung ho for this. And personally, I've never seen such excitement for a new reiteration of Transformers. So I suppose it's a double barrel question. First, how hands on are Hasbro? And secondly, what's it feel like being in ground zero and be able to build a whole new reiteration of the Transformers from literally the ground up?
Yeah. Hasbro has been fairly hands-on, more hands-on than I'm used to with anything
Right.
else that I've worked
Okay.
on, which has been a challenge for me. But I kind of knew that was going to be happening going in. Um, I know that they're coming from this place of it's more of like that kind of corporate world that I'm not familiar with and
Mm.
I'm not very comfortable with, which, is kind of something I've had to deal with, honestly. But actually, this question was asked in a previous call. Working on your abs and doing crunches is never fun, but iron sharpens iron, as you will. So that's been overall a positive, I think. And as far as working from the ground up, I mean, dude, it's been really fun. One thing that was given to me before I even signed to do the project was Sean sent me a document that uh, Robert and Sean and a few other people at Skybound had worked up to actually pitch to Hasbro. That Hasbro had said, you know what, we like this, let's do it. And they asked if I'd be willing to kind of stay on that kind of track that they had kind of pathed out. There's these big monumental story moments that are happening in
Mm.
Transformers over the course of years, and they kind of wanted me to stick to some of those bigger beats. So I had these like big islands that I had to get to, and they put me in a rowboat, and I kind of figured out how to get there on my own. So a lot of the characters that you see in the comic, the Transformers used, the emotional beats and the action set pieces are mine. And it's been kind of fun to fill in the gaps in a way that's
Right.
fun. Yeah, it's been a blast. I definitely allowing me to put my own fingerprint on the book while also feeling kind of like, oh, cool, there's like big things in the works.
Because obviously you look up someone like Spike who appears in the first issue, and there's
Sure.
just so much. So I suppose I'm using him as an example. There's obviously other characters in that issue that I don't want to spoil for people. How much do you jettison from the past, and how much do you keep? And again, I suppose with those big story beats that you have to row to, metaphorically and literally, what do you decide to keep? What do you decide to develop in a character that in some reiterations like Spike has actually matured into an adult, had his own family, etc. You're pulling it way back a little bit, aren't you? To
Yep.
keep it simple, yes, I suppose, what do you jettison, what do you keep, and what do Hasbro kind of want you to move towards without, of course, giving away any spoilers?
Of course. I think a big part of the reason that I actually signed on to do the book was Skybound made it very clear that they wanted this to be kind of a return to the classic vibe of what you and I might recognize as Transformers. Um, the first question I asked when Sean called me is like, "Hey, would you think about doing Transformers?" I was like, "Is this G1 or we have to do new stuff?" And he's like, "We would really like to go back to the G1 aesthetic and vibe." And I
Right.
said, "Okay, that gets me excited." And not only because I love the look, and it's part of who I am as a person, honestly. Uh, I wanted the challenge of drawing those blocky characters. I knew it was going to be hard, and I wanted to figure out if I could do it.
Lots of rulers and
So
T-squares.
yeah, exactly. Uh, so because of that return to kind of the classic vibe, it kind of provided a good roadmap visually and story wise. Not roadmap, it just like kind of like you have kind of this vision in your head of like basically like a style Bible, that like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have. Yeah. And honestly, the 86 cartoon movie was basically that for me, trying to channel that vibe visually, creatively, story wise. There's fun elements, there's sad elements. Um, that all kind of culminated into what you see in issue one, honestly, is and you know, I I Robert Kirkman does not reach out to me very often, right? But I'm gonna
He's a
pat
busy
myself.
man.
He's a busy guy. I'm gonna pat myself on the back here because after he read the PDF of issue one, he emailed me just to tell me how freaking awesome he thought it was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like 2 lines. He was like, "This is like the best Transformers comic ever. You've done an amazing job. I'm so excited."
There's
And
high
so
praise indeed.
it
Excellent.
is high praise. It is
It
high
is a
praise.
good
Thank you,
first
Robert.
issue, by the way. I love
Thank
the
you.
organic look your artwork brings to robots that have in the past been very technically drawn. It does feel more like a lived-in universe from the very
Mm.
get-go. I just really love that different vibe that you bring
Oh,
with your style of
that was
artwork.
exactly the goal.
Well, it works. It works, and you'll read my
Awesome.
review on the 4th of October. It's glowing. Now,
Heck yeah.
as more series get added into the sort of shared universe, how does it become manageable? Obviously, you've got a great editor who's running all of these books, but is there any sort of like writers' retreats like they used to at Marvel and DC in the get-go? Any Zoom conferences? How do you keep spinning all of these plates as this universe begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger over the coming months?
Oh man, that's a great question. Um, Honestly, for the most part, Skybound has let me put my head down and just make the book. And then I'll get an email here and there with like little notifications of something that might need to happen in an issue that I'm either writing or drawing, usually in the writing phase.
Mm,
Um, I, I, a lot of that question has to do with editorial and like kind of what they want to do. There are things and story beats that I can't talk about that we are actively discussing. But as far as like a writer's retreat or anything like that, it hasn't been as intense yet. I think because we are all kind of taking our time building out our own worlds and our own titles before we really push the envelope when it comes to mixing the
yeah.
channels. Um, there are some big things planned and some big elements. You know, like every time I start talking about this stuff, every time I be on a panel, Sean and Robert will look at me like, "Don't give anything away." uh, um, so I will just say that you know, editorial has been doing a good job of keeping everything at eye level, so I can kind of figure out what's happening when. Um, and Yeah, it's fun. I've never had to do that before. Like I've whenever I've worked on stuff, even for like the big two, it's always been on its own little corner, away from continuity or in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
galaxy like that
Do
doesn't
what you want.
matter. Yeah, exactly. And here I'm like getting calls. I'm like, hey, make sure that this gets added here. I'm like, oh yeah, right, okay, cool. Um, so it's been fun, different but fun.
Right, two quick last questions because that way you can get back on time. Firstly, do you always hear Orson Welles' voice in your head when you're drawing the Transformers? And secondly, what soundtrack do you listen to when you're writing and drawing Transformer comics?
Okay, so Orson Welles, no,
Okay,
but
that was a quick answer.
uh, yeah, I usually will be watching some sort of bad television while drawing.
Right.
Or maybe a podcast if it's early in the day. As the day gets longer and longer, or farther into the evening, the TV becomes trashier and trashier. Uh, and as far as soundtrack while making and writing, I won't lie, the '86 movie soundtrack. I've been listening to that since I was like 11 years old. I bought it on CD. It was amazing, and I still love it. It holds up. It's one of my favorite records of all time. I have
Very
listened to it
cool.
while writing.
Right.
Um, I also listen a lot to John Carpenter's Lost Themes records. He has three
Ooh,
records
yeah.
that he made with his godson. That's just like instrumental, and they're otherworldly. They're so beautiful.
Mm.
There's no lyrics, it's a really great way to vibe out. Um, so listening to them a lot, and listening to when I write, sometimes I'll listen to the Midnight. They also have instrumental versions of all their songs. Um, and it's kind of like old school, kind of synthwave stuff.
Right.
And yeah, if it's played via robotics, it'll probably be a good thing to write to. So yeah, man.
Daniel, thank you for your time. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. It's great meeting you in person, or as much in person as I can
Likewise.
do living in the UK. Best of luck. You don't need it for this comic. I've read it. It's an absolute corker. And all the best for the rest of your day.
Thank you, brother. You too.